COVID-19 was a real reality check for banks and many business people. When it hit and suddenly everything shut down, you would sit with your clients and realize that we're in this together. There's no cash flow, there's no business, what are we gonna do? And the reality is, when it comes to the business of lending, whatever issues have occurred in the past, and generally, I'd say in life, that's the past, it can't be changed. And so what we said is let's focus on the future. Let's understand the situation faced by our customers. But then even as we do so, let's plan for what happens post-COVID. And so the moratoria that we gave was to simply tell our clients, we understand, we give you a break initially for 6 months. Let's see what happens after those 6 months. After those 6 months, we had further discussions. And of course, the biggest risk is if you allow interest to keep accruing, because at a certain point, the debt becomes unsustainable. But I think the matter of empathy is the ability to appreciate that when businesses are established and when business relations are developed, they can be successful and at times they could fail. And if you go into these transactions with such a mindset, I'd say that as a bank, our key responsibility is to ensure that as we engage in discussions with respect to lending, we give the owners of these businesses what we view as a reality check. So we highlight the risks that they could face. And so when we do decide to enter into this transaction, it's clearly viewed as a partnership. And so we just walk the journey with them.
To be honest, what I saw in the last 2 years is that from a transaction point of view, it seemed to me like there was more disposable cash for people than before. At a certain level, there seems to have been more disposable cash. And what I saw is that you still need, of course, to do your transactions. Some categories would struggle with getting payments out. But on the other hand, I wouldn't say that everything went down completely. I think it's just a readjustment. So where people are drinking less, maybe they now drink more because they have more time in their hands. The petrol stations may not do so well because people are traveling less. So what I saw is that transactions went on. As I said when I spoke earlier, there were challenges in terms of registration. And also, of course, also, COVID gave a perfect excuse for things are hard for me. I can't do ABCD, and you really can't argue with it. In a sense, it was an opportunity for people to save because transport costs, I think it just kind of readjusted everybody's budget. On the other hand, I would say that then led to probably transactions which you would not otherwise expect to proceed.
John talked about digitization of commerce. And obviously all of us, I think, have witnessed a significant amount of digitization. In fact, I think the curve, the uptake has been really steep. But one of the things that we do know, and speaking to you specifically in the real estate space, is the attempt by the Ministry of Lands to digitize lands records, to ensure that you can carry out a search from the comfort of your desk, to be able to ease transactions relating to land. What has been your experience in relation to digitization of the lands registry, and has it eased the way you are able to facilitate transactions?
I would say it's work in progress because it's still early days. If you just look at the entire landscape, Nairobi is where they started, and Nairobi, okay, there's a significant amount of transactions here. But if you look at it, I think from a nationwide perspective, it's still work in progress with a much larger chunk of the work to be done. But that said, I strongly believe that when the work is complete, it will completely revolutionize the way we work. The ability to transact from your desk, which is something that previously was not thought possible, because everybody thinks, you go to the lands registry, you pay stamp duty manually, or you go to a bank and pay stamp duty. You take the physical documents, physically stamped. Registration is a physical exercise. I think I'm seeing situations where, for example, stamping will no longer be physical. You can pay, first of all, digitally, and then the transaction itself is completed completely digitally. I think that with time, first of all, I don't think we have an option in terms of digitizing. It's the more you resist these things, the more you get left behind. So I think we don't have an option. But number two, I would imagine maybe towards the end of this year, would have been at a significant chunk. And come 2023 going forward, the bulk of transactions would be digital in all the aspects, both in terms of with the georeferencing. It's possible to do even valuations in a different way. It's possible to do stamping differently, registration differently. I think all those things are beneficial to consumers of conveyancing services. And I just see that transactions will be faster, and therefore the economy can grow much faster.
So, John, banks traditionally rely on real property as security. But you have also spoken about innovation. You have spoken about digitization as well. Are we going to see banks being more flexible, more innovative about what they accept as security, the manner in which they perceive their clients who are borrowing, ability to repay, and so on and so forth, rather than merely looking at the customer and looking at what security they're able to offer beyond perhaps their skill sets, beyond the IP that they bring to the table, and so on?
Thank you for that question. I'd say that if one looks at the traditional lending side of the business in isolation, then it does appear as though banks are still very conservative. And I don't think that will change significantly, because with the responsibilities placed on banks with respect to protecting depositor funds and ensuring that the financial system is operating without shocks, does require banks to be extremely prudent in lending. And one of the key principles in lending is that you need to have a second and third way out in case the primary source of repayment does not come through. However, if we look at the development of lending in Kenya, the first instance is access to financing, accessibility, and that, I think, has been very much enabled through mobile technology. Anybody who has a mobile phone has access to digital borrowing. The next aspect, of course, is the cost of that lending. Does it make sense for one to borrow digitally at a certain rate, and what are they using the funds for? There'll be different views, but you'll find that for many people, if one is a trader and they're purchasing a product in the morning to sell in the evening, their view is not the cost of funding, it is the margin that they will make from the entire transaction, from buying to selling and realizing profit. If you're looking at somebody who is bridging a few days to pay school fees, or has a patient to admit in hospital, for them the cost of that digital borrowing is not a factor. And so I think we've gone a long way in providing access to loans to the vast majority of Kenyans, and all that lending is unsecured. Of course, the third aspect after access and cost is the other terms. And the other terms, of course, brings in the issue of collateral. And I would say that collateral is the second or third way out. You will probably see a lot more structured solutions, especially now that the risk-based pricing models are being rolled out by banks. So there'll be flexibility to introduce more structured solutions that do not necessarily rely on tangible collateral. So it's really an evolution of lending.
Are digital lending platforms a real threat to banks or to banking business?
That's a great question, and one of the comments that I made in my when I was speaking up there is the need to keep moving, to continue creating and developing new solutions. Banks are intermediators. We intermediate cash flows and the flow of funds between businesses. We look after depositors' funds and we lend out the excess funding. I don't think that one can consider digital platforms a threat to any bank that is progressive. You'll probably know as NCBA, we have a very large digital business with a client base of probably over 30 million, across the countries that we operate in, probably closer to 40 million. And therefore, from our perspective, we've embraced technology. We have a bank tech business that is continuously coming up with new technology-based solutions that will ultimately disintermediate the traditional banking setup. So we certainly don't view it as a challenge because we are part of it. But certainly for any financial institution that doesn't embrace digitization, they'll probably have a challenge to be relevant in the coming years.
Another question for you, John, before I come back to Tom. Somebody says you talked about building capacity to be the best and not preparing for crisis. What capacity building services does the bank offer to clients?
Thank you. That's a pretty broad question. We view ourselves at NCBA as a bank that engages with clients as partners. We do have advisory services. We have regular economic fora on a quarterly basis. We have one-on-one discussions on the economy and what's going on in the industry. We discuss various solutions and we discuss trends that we see in the market. To get down to specific products and solutions, we are very keen on renewable energy and supporting renewable energy, which we consider a very stable source of energy. It's good for the environment and it is extremely cheap. And when it comes to developing capacity, it's a very broad discussion that one could have.
That question brings me on to you, Tom, because the question is, what sets you apart as a law firm?
I think everybody who's here and who has been served by TRIPLEOKLAW, I hope you can attest to the fact that the ability to stick onto what the client wants, the ability to deliver on what the client wants, I think is what drives us, be it in the dispute resolution side or the transaction side, because really, if you split the firm, those would be the two areas. So what would set us apart is, are you able to deliver? I think the answer in our case would be yes. Are you able to deliver at a good price? I think the answer would be yes. And are you beyond being compromised? Because you could succeed on the first two, but you've all had complaints about somebody's very good, but they can also really mess you up. They can compromise your matter. I think that issue of integrity, in addition to just the ability to deliver at a competitive price, is something that I would say TRIPLEOKLAW is able to promise anybody that we deal with, that we will do it right, and we'll do it without compromising your interest as a client.
But what does risk-based lending pose to the credit landscape for SMEs?
This is probably something that has been, it's the right time. It's the right time to introduce risk-based lending, and I personally wish that we could have introduced it much earlier. What this really means for the average borrower, the SME, it brings predictability. It's a very clear model on how banks price their lending, how a bank determines its prime lending rate, the liquidity premium, and the risk premium that it places. And therefore, for an SME that maintains a strong credit rating and is consistent with their payments and has developed a strong reputation with its bankers, then they will be able to access borrowing at rates that are predictable in line with market. And therefore, I believe that risk-based lending actually protects the SMEs from arbitrary increases in interest rates.
One of the things that John spoke about was workforce management and culture, the hierarchy in terms of what is important to human resources, essentially, and that perhaps money wasn't necessarily the most important thing. And this, I understood you to be saying, is an output from our experience through COVID. I don't want to ask you this question because I think I'd like to ask this to a younger member of the audience. So I'm going to put Christian on the spot and ask you, Christian, to come and speak about the value of work from your perspective, in terms of hierarchy of what you would like to see as part of your workplace culture, what your generation thinks about work, and what gives you satisfaction in the workplace.
Thank you very much, Senior Counsel John Ohaga. That's a very interesting question from the perspective of an advocate who has also had a chance of working in an environment that actually embraces a hybrid system. Why do I say a hybrid system of working? As you know, that when COVID happened and people had to work from home, organizations had to restructure themselves in a way that they are able to provide value but still get value from their employees. That is very critical. How are you able to get value from your employees? How are you able to make sure that in any particular instance there is accountability mechanisms even when people are working from home? So then the digitization that we have seen within the environment, and I'm speaking this from the perspective of TRIPLEOKLAW law, the digitization and the hybrid system where one can work from home gives a better leeway for any employee and the employer to actually have better trust mechanisms with their employers and the employees. Because, you can't have a hybrid working system without proper trust between the employer and the employee. So therefore, I would say from a position of an advocate, I wouldn't speak about banks really, but from the position of an advocate, then this digitization process has been very helpful in a manner that we are able even to conduct meetings virtually from wherever areas that you have. That actually now bridges the gap of delivery in terms of time. So that's a very critical element, especially with litigation matters or any other matter, because time is always of essence. I'd say that even to every other client, be it a banker or be it any other client. They want matters to be delivered in a valuable manner, but within short periods of time. That is very critical for us with the digitization process. I don't know whether I have been able to answer your question, Senior Partner. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you. I know I put you on the spot impromptu, but that was very useful. So I'm going to ask again if there are any questions. If there are no questions, there's a question over there. Please come forward.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nyota. I'm a lawyer, and my question maybe will go to the panelists. How divested is the economy from government and politics? So that I think one of the partners, when the commercial department was presenting, talked about clients are still able to transact. But the question is, how divested are we that? Can we survive without these politics? Can we just dissolve the politics outside us so that the economy can still be running and clients and there's no freight of capital, so that are people still willing to bring in capital? Yeah, I think maybe that is the line that I would need maybe you people to address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nyota. John, is that something you can grapple with?
Yeah, I can grapple with it and then pass the mic on to Tom. Yeah. In my view, as a country, we've stood the test of democracy and politics. We've been through many election cycles. Certainly, there have been a few challenges, but with every election cycle, I've seen more and more business confidence. And therefore, to answer your question directly, Nyota, especially to young people like you, is to just focus on the issues that you can control, put aside the externalities and think long term. Think long term, because it's your ability to focus on your business and your profession and to continue developing yourself is what makes you surmount any future challenges that may come up. Yeah? But from my view, to speak specifically about the political environment, I think as a country we've been through many election cycles, and I think we'll be through many more. And TRIPLEOK, you've been around for 20 years, and the focus has just been on growing and handling one's business. Thank you.
I think my perspective on it is this. If you look at Kenya's GDP is 10 trillion. Government budget is about 3 trillion shillings. So there's a significant input of government in our GDP. If you go to the Western world, and I'm thinking of a country like Italy where the governments are very unstable and keep on changing. What they have done is with time they have managed to completely divorce the two. Programs run irrespective of which party is in government. I think those are things that come with time. That with time, policies are in place and things work irrespective of who's in office. We have 5-year election cycles, and I think countries like Italy are different because the chance of a government collapsing between is very high. And therefore, it's very difficult if you say that this government, the last 6 months, is going to determine, to give you a 5-year budget. But what I see here is that with time, government becomes less and less relevant. And I think the cycles that we're seeing is that even in an election year, we'll still have GDP growth, which would not be possible if there was, if the situation was different. So I think with time, you'll find that even in an election, if you continue growing in an election year, it means that the election is less relevant to the growth of the economy. And I think that can only get better.
Thank you very much for that, Tom. So I'm going to let you go now, John and Tom. Thank you so much. But before you do, I just want to tell you this little story. A psychology professor was speaking to his class about an experiment that he had done. And so the psychology professor said to his class, he put a rat, a male rat, in a cage. And he put it in one corner, and he put a piece of cake in the other corner. And the male rat ran across to the cake and grabbed it straight away. The psychology professor then introduced a female rat into the cage and put a piece of bread on the other side. And the male rat ran across to the bread and consumed it. The female rat was still in the corner over there. The professor added cheese into the cage, and the male rat still ran across to the cheese. And so the professor said to his class, how can we explain the behavior of this male rat? Why isn't it running across to the female rat? And one of the students said, well, maybe the female rat is the wife of the male rat. Why don't you change the female rat? The student got an A. So thank you very much for your time. Shall we give him a hand clap?